I'm not asking for a favor, Rachel, my father said, his voice sharp and colder than I remembered. I'm asking you to do your job. His words hit harder than I'd expected, leaving me momentarily speechless. I clutched the edge of my desk, staring at the man who had been missing from my life for more than 20 years. His expression was stern, his voice even more severe, and I couldn't quite tell if what I heard was anger or desperation, or maybe both. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 31 years old, a defense attorney with a stable career, and single by choice, deeply committed to my profession. My relationship with my father has always been defined more by his absence than his presence. He walked out when I was just 9 years old, leaving my mom and me without so much as a word. And now, after 2 full decades of silence, he had reappeared in my office, not gently, not apologetically, but with a sense of demand, asking for my help like no time had passed. I didn't know how to process it. Leaning back in my chair, I tried to sort through the swirl of emotions clouding my mind. So you want me to represent you? I asked, keeping my tone measured. But let's not pretend this is simply a matter of professional obligation. You need my help, and after everything that happened, you just show up expecting I'll agree to it. He shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable, though he didn't break eye contact. This isn't personal, Rachel. It's business. I wouldn't have come if I didn't believe you were the best person for the job. Business. That was typical of him, viewing everything in terms of transactions and advantages. He had always focused on what people could offer him, what he could take from them in return. And yet, there was a flicker of something beneath his cold tone, something that could have been guilt or regret. I didn't want to care enough to find out which. I'll need time to think it over, I said at last, my voice stronger than I felt. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other clients to attend to. He nodded stiffly and stood, brushing down the front of his jacket. Take all the time you need, he said, although the urgency in his tone betrayed his words. Just remember, Rachel, this is my life on the line. The moment he left, the tension he brought stayed behind. I sat there, staring at the chair he had just vacated, my thoughts spiraling. I had taken on difficult cases before, but this wasn't about legal arguments or courtroom tactics. This was personal. This was the man who had left my mom struggling to pay the bills, who had been absent for every birthday, every graduation, and every achievement. He had been a shadow for so long, and now he was suddenly real again. Later that evening, I called Jessica, my mentor and someone who had become a maternal figure to me after my mother passed away. I paced my apartment as I explained. He just came out of nowhere, Jess. Like he had the right to ask me for something after all this time. No apology, no explanation, just, I need you. Jessica sighed on the other end. Rachel, this is incredibly difficult. But at the end of the day, you're a lawyer. The real question is whether you can separate your personal pain from your professional responsibility. I paused, staring out my window at the city glowing in the night. I'm not sure I can, I admitted, but I'm also not sure I have another option. Over the next few days, I threw myself into reviewing the file my father had left. It was chaotic. The charges against him were serious. He was accused of embezzling millions from his own company, Monroe Investments. The evidence was troubling: large wire transfers, altered financial documents, and inconsistent records. Everything seemed to point directly at him. Taking this case would mean walking into court with the odds stacked against us. But the deeper I looked, the more uneasy I felt. The transactions were too precise, too calculated. My father was never known for subtlety or strategy. He was impulsive, erratic, not the kind of person who could pull off something this intricate. That's when I started looking into Alan Carter, his business partner. Alan's name appeared in several important documents. The more I read, the more I realized he had plenty to gain if my father took the fall. I didn't know yet what I'd do with that suspicion, but it planted a seed I couldn't shake. One night, after hours of poring over spreadsheets and reports, I called Jessica again. Something doesn't make sense, Jess. I don't think my dad did this alone, if at all. I think someone set him up. Maybe Alan. There was a pause before she responded. If that's true, Rachel, then this is bigger than just defending your father. You could be uncovering something far more serious. Are you prepared for the consequences of that? Leaning back, I exhaled deeply. I don't know if I'm ready, Jess, but I think I need to find out the truth. By the next morning, I had made my decision. I picked up the phone, called my father, and told him I'd take on his case. But I made one condition crystal clear. I would be in full control. No interference. No vague answers or withheld facts. To my surprise, he agreed without protest. Maybe he understood how serious the situation had become, or maybe he simply had no other option left. Getting ready for the initial court hearing was exhausting. I had to go through years of financial documents, interview employees, and build a story that would convince a jury my father wasn't guilty. But this case wasn't just about facts or evidence. It was tangled up with everything I'd buried: old wounds, resentment, disappointment. Representing him wasn't only about legal work. It felt like stepping into a battlefield lined with emotional landmines. Still, I kept reminding myself, this isn't personal. This is about doing my job and chasing the truth. Our first meeting in my office to prepare for the case was charged with unspoken tension. He sat directly across from me, arms crossed and posture guarded, though I caught brief moments when his expression softened, usually when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I kept things strictly professional, outlining the approach and clarifying what I needed from him. Then, breaking the silence, he said, with a hesitant tone, "You're good at this." I didn't expect this level of competence. His words caught me off guard. I wasn't sure whether to take it as praise or criticism. Without betraying my thoughts, I replied evenly, "I've been doing this for a long time. It's what I'm trained for." He simply gave a nod and remained quiet, allowing us to drift back into the task at hand. As the weeks progressed, the case began to take shape, although it wasn't without its obstacles. Alan Carter, my father's old business associate, proved to be elusive. His deposition was filled with calculated responses that subtly cast suspicion on my father while conveniently omitting any mention of his own actions. The strain was building, not just in court, but in my personal life too. One evening, after a particularly taxing day of legal arguments and intense cross-examinations, I found myself sitting across from Jessica over coffee. "He's a difficult client," I admitted. "It constantly feels like he's withholding something. Then there are moments where he seems genuinely overwhelmed." Jessica took a slow sip from her mug and gave me a thoughtful look. "That's the complication with family," she said. "They aren't just clients, they reflect who we are. Every word, every disagreement is tangled up in years of unresolved emotions. But you're doing the right thing, Rachel. You're uncovering the truth." Her words echoed in my mind as the trial approached. The deeper I got into the case, the more I realized what was truly at risk, not just for my father, but for me. This wasn't only about proving his innocence. It was a test of whether I could face the past and handle this case with integrity and strength. One night, during yet another long meeting, the quiet tension finally snapped. We were reviewing a sequence of financial transactions when I noticed him staring out the window, clearly lost in thought. "Is something bothering you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He hesitated before giving a small shake of the head. "Just thinking." I put my pen down and leaned back. "Thinking about what exactly? About how things ended up like this? Or is it about the day you left Mom and me behind?" The words came out sharper than I meant, but I didn't backtrack. His reaction was immediate. His eyes widened slightly, caught off guard, like I had touched on something he'd tried to bury. "Rachel, he began, but I cut him off. "No, we're not avoiding this conversation. You abandoned us. You never even looked back. Do you understand what that did to Mom? To me? Now, suddenly you're back, not to make things right, not to apologize, but because you need help. Does any of that even matter to you?" His jaw clenched, and for a second, I braced myself for a defensive response. But instead, he exhaled slowly, shoulders slumping. "You're right," he said in a low voice. "There's no excuse. I made some terrible choices. And honestly, I didn't think I deserved to come back after everything I'd done." His honesty took me by surprise. I'd spent so many years imagining this confrontation, preparing myself for anger or denial, but not for open remorse. "You didn't even try," I said, my voice shaking slightly. You left us to figure it all out on our own. He nodded, eyes still distant. And I regret that every single day. I shook my head slowly, still trying to understand my own reasons. I don't even know why I took your case, I confessed. After everything you didn't do for us, why am I the one defending you now? He stared down at the papers scattered on the table. When he looked up again, his eyes held a mix of sorrow and something almost resembling respect. Maybe it's because you're stronger than I ever was, he said gently. His words rattled me. That's not an answer, I shot back. This isn't about kindness. I'm doing my job. He leaned back and let out another sigh. That may be true. But, Rachel, the way I see it, you have something I lost a long time ago, integrity. You had every reason to walk away. No one would have blamed you. But you didn't. You chose to stay, even when it was hard. That means something. I leaned forward slightly, studying his face. So what are you saying? That your lack of integrity means you're guilty in this case too. My voice was sharp, demanding clarity. His expression grew serious, and he shook his head firmly. No, I didn't do what they're accusing me of. I've made plenty of bad decisions in life, but I never stole from my own company. I'm not a thief. I watched him closely, searching his face for any sign of deception. There was a raw edge in his voice, a kind of urgency that made his words feel real, at least, in that moment. The shadows of the past still clung tightly to me, making it hard to place full trust in him. Then why does everything seem to lead straight back to you? I asked, my voice steady. The money transfers, the altered documents, everything points to your name. His frustration was evident as his voice grew sharper. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. And that's why I need your help. Someone framed me, Rachel. I realize how bad this looks, but I'm telling you the truth, I didn't do any of this. For a fleeting moment, I felt a twinge of sympathy for him. But I couldn't afford to let that cloud my judgment. Rising from my seat, I said firmly, you'd better hope I can prove your innocence, because if it turns out you're lying, I won't shield you. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in the investigation, determined to unravel the truth. Alan Carter's name kept surfacing, scattered throughout the records. His involvement was just subtle enough to evade detection unless you were digging deeply. The more I found, the more convinced I became that he had orchestrated a scheme to benefit from my father's ruin. Still, suspicions alone wouldn't cut it. I needed solid, undeniable proof. During one of our strategy sessions, I laid all the evidence on the table. Alan had full access to the accounts, the records, everything, I said, pointing to a detailed timeline I had created. For months, he's been pulling away from the company, covertly liquidating assets, and moving them to his private holdings. If we can demonstrate he had both motive and opportunity, we might finally redirect suspicion away from you. My father listened intently, a rare silence falling over him, unusual for someone who always had something to contribute. Do you really believe he's responsible for all this? He asked cautiously. I do, I replied. But this isn't about what I believe. It's about what I can prove. And if Alan is as sharp as he appears, he's covered his tracks thoroughly. Circumstantial evidence alone won't clear your name. Everything changed during a pretrial deposition. One of Alan Carter's senior managers, a woman named Ellen Price, was brought in to testify. Initially, her answers were measured, routine, composed, and not especially informative. But as I dug deeper into the financial inconsistencies and Alan's possible role, something shifted in her. Her voice wavered, and she kept casting anxious glances at the door. Sensing an opening, I took a calculated risk. Ms. Price, I began, keeping my tone calm yet purposeful, is there anything specific you recall about Mr. Carter's involvement? Perhaps something you overheard or witnessed that might shed light on the situation. She paused, visibly conflicted. The room fell completely silent, save for the quiet scratching of the court reporter's pen. Then, after a deep breath, she finally spoke. There was a phone call, a couple of months ago. I overheard Mr. Carter say something like, Michael is the perfect scapegoat. Her voice was just above a whisper, but her words hit like thunder. I quickly exchanged a glance with my co-counsel. Did you report this at the time? I asked. Ellen shook her head slowly. No. I didn't feel it was my place, but it's been weighing on me ever since. I wasn't even sure it mattered, until now. Although her statement was a major development, I knew it wouldn't be enough by itself. Without something tangible to back it up, her testimony could be dismissed as hearsay or simple misunderstanding. I thanked her for being forthcoming and assured her we'd follow up. Later that evening, I reviewed the deposition with our IT specialist, who had been tirelessly combing through digital archives for weeks. "We're getting close," he said, the glow of his laptop screen reflecting in his eyes. "I'm still sorting through some older email backups. If Ellen left any digital trail, it should be in here." The waiting was agonizing, but I clung to the hope that buried somewhere in those old files was the missing piece we needed. Then, 2 days later, just as I was beginning to feel discouraged, the call came in. Our investigator's voice was urgent. "Rachel, I found something." I sat up immediately. "Found what?" "It's an email Ellen sent to an outside accountant," he explained. "The message is vague, but it clearly references blaming your father. The original was deleted, but the backup system preserved a copy. The timestamp matches perfectly with the early stages of the financial irregularities." My heart skipped a beat. "Can you read it to me?" He did. "The way things are structured, Michael will take the fall if this collapses. Keep everything tight on your end." He let the silence linger, the gravity of the message hanging in the air. "This wasn't just negligence, Rachel. It was calculated." Relief swept through me. This is what we needed. This proves everything. He wasn't finished. I also verified the IP address. The message was sent from Ellen's office computer. There's no plausible way to dispute that it originated from her device. I thanked him and ended the call, staring down at the notes spread across my desk. With Ellen's statement and this email, the puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. I had everything I needed, not just to clear my father's name, but also to expose Ellen's lies for what they truly were. The next crucial move was to present all the evidence in court. Although I wanted to feel victorious, I understood that the most challenging part still lay ahead. When the day of the court hearing finally came, a heavy sense of pressure accompanied me into the courtroom. My father was seated beside me, quieter than I had ever seen him. His expression revealed a blend of nervousness and cautious hope. I laid the folder with the printed email and deposition summaries on the table, then inhaled deeply to steady my nerves. As the session began, the opposing attorney tried to cast my father as careless and irresponsible, a man whose poor decisions endangered the integrity of his business. I remained composed, waiting for the right moment to bring the truth forward. Eventually, the judge addressed me, and I stood with the email firmly in my hand. "Your Honor," I began, making sure my voice didn't waver, "we've uncovered new evidence that brings vital clarity to this matter. It directly links Alan Carter to an intentional scheme to mislead and frame my client." A murmur spread through the courtroom as I distributed copies of the email to both the judge and the other side. "This email," I continued, "was recovered from a backup server after an unsuccessful attempt by Mr. Carter to erase it. Within the message, he clearly outlines a strategy to place blame on Michael Monroe in case any financial irregularities were discovered." I paused, letting the weight of that revelation land. "In addition, we have sworn testimony from a witness who heard Mr. Carter referring to my client as an ideal scapegoat." The judge gave a slight nod, encouraging me to proceed. "This situation isn't the result of incompetence or oversight on Mr. Monroe's part. What we're looking at is a deliberate plan by Mr. Carter to hide his own wrongdoing and deflect accountability." For the first time during the trial, Alan Carter's calm demeanor began to break. He shifted restlessly in his chair, casting nervous glances toward his legal counsel. My father looked over at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in years: genuine respect. As the judge sifted through the newly presented evidence and listened to the final arguments, the atmosphere in the courtroom thickened with anticipation. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge's expression, watching closely for any hint of his thoughts. When he finally brought the gavel down, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "The court finds adequate grounds to redirect its focus to the accusations concerning Mr. Alan Carter," the judge declared. The trial regarding Michael Monroe is suspended indefinitely, pending further inquiry based on the newly submitted evidence. A ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. My dad turned to look at me. For a second, I thought he might say something. But instead, he simply nodded, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything I had done. In the following days, all charges against my father were officially dropped. The spotlight turned entirely to Alan Carter, who quickly became the subject of a full-scale investigation. The media caught on swiftly, and soon, headlines detailing the case against Alan dominated the news cycle. For the first time in months, my father was no longer shadowed by suspicion or doubt. Yet, even in victory, my emotions felt tangled. Clearing his name had been my mission, but achieving it unearthed emotions and memories I had pushed aside for too long. One evening, after the charges were dismissed, my father requested to meet. His voice was quieter than usual during the call. When he stepped into my office, he looked different, less guarded, maybe even unsure. He sat across from me, struggling to find the right words in the heavy silence. "I want to thank you," he said eventually, his tone soft. "I'm not sure I deserve it, but I am grateful for everything you've done." I leaned back in my chair, arms folded across my chest. "There's no need to thank me. I was just doing my job as your attorney." He winced at my detached tone but gave a small nod. "You were more than just my attorney. You saved me, Rachel. You did that even after all the pain I caused. I don't know how I could ever deserve that kind of help." I observed him for a moment, trying to read whether his remorse was genuine. "It wasn't about loyalty," I said after a pause. "It was about choosing what was right. And, truthfully, it wasn't even about you. I needed to prove to myself that I could rise above everything you failed to be." His posture sank, weighed down by my words. "I wish I could undo the past," he admitted quietly. "I wish I had been present for you and for your mother. But I can't go back. All I can do now is tell you how proud I am of the person you've become, even though I had no part in shaping you." For a fleeting moment, I felt a touch of compassion. But that small flicker wasn't strong enough to erase the years of pain and absence. "I'm not looking for your pride," I said firmly. "What I needed was a father. And you weren't there when it truly mattered." He nodded slowly, accepting my words in silence. "I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." I chose to remain quiet, allowing the stillness to convey everything I couldn't say aloud. Forgiveness didn't come, not in that moment, and perhaps not ever. Some kinds of hurt cut too deeply, leaving behind marks that no amount of remorse can truly heal. Yet, while I sat there, observing my father wrestle with the weight of his past, something shifted in me. I came to a powerful realization. I didn't need his validation or his admiration. What truly mattered was proving to myself that I had the strength to move beyond the hurt, the rejection, and the uncertainty. And I had done just that. I had cleared his name, brought the truth to light, and allowed him to see who I had become. When he stepped out of my office that day, I lingered for a while, letting the silence wrap around me like a soft curtain. I was no longer the young girl he had once left behind. I had grown into Rachel Monroe, a woman who had fought hard to find her own value. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of pride in who I had become. Hey there! If you enjoyed the story, make sure to tap the like button and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out and ensures you won't miss any of the amazing stories we have coming your way. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.